Deviant communities, like subcultures and countercultures, maintain their own values, norms, vocabularies, and rewards for deviant behavior. And some communities provide support to those in presumed deviant categories, like various 12-step programs. Although social deviants do not follow the rules of the majority, it does not mean that they do not follow any rules whatsoever or are asocial people. In fact, these people may be part of groups that have their own codes of behavior that, if ignored or broken, can get an individual expelled from a group. Or what can happen is when members of a certain group have been blocked from being able to participate in aspects of dominant culture, they create their own groups to try to meet those needs. So, for an example, I watched a documentary about Tent City. I believe it was either in Memphis or Nashville, Tennessee. And this group basically would be seen as a deviant community because they were homeless and they had made this little tent city or up under a bridge, but they had rules. One of the things that they had rules is that in their common area, basically where they had their fire and people would sit around and talk, you could not be drunk in that common area. I believe they gave them like 3 times or 3 chances, and if they were drunk 3 times, then they were going to be asked to leave Tent City. They also had rules about where you got rid of your trash. You didn't get rid of your trash right there, and they made sure that their common area was clean. They even had rules about basically safety for women. If you were a single woman and you lived in Tent City, you had the right where no man would sexually harass you. If you were being sexually harassed, they actually had like a mayor or kind of like a leader of the tent city. You would bring that information to them, and then they would handle that. So this is not to say that there are not any rules surrounding that, because there are rules surrounding deviant communities. They just do not maintain or follow the rules of the dominant group. Okay. Crime is one form of deviant. Behavior recognizes violating rules and norms of society, specifically that behavior which violates particular criminal laws and for which sanctions are imposed by officials or agents to bring one into conformity with cultural and social norms. Criminology is the study of crime or deviance that violates specific laws. So now we're going to discuss and talk about crime in the criminal justice system. One of the things that's important to understand is that criminology is different than criminal justice. Criminologists are actually sociologists that study crimes. They look at patterns of crimes. They look at trends when it comes to crimes. They also look at who's committing these kinds of crimes. They will look at the criminal justice itself, because they will even look to see if there's any issues or problems within that criminal justice system, or if they notice, depending on which type of criminologist you are, which type of theory you follow, but they will look for those certain aspects within the criminal justice system. The national crime reports, such as the FBI's Uniform Crime Reports, used for the rise and fall of crime rates, and the U.S. Department of Justice National Crime Victim Survey are based on national surveys. So the Uniform Crime Report actually gets their information from crime that has been reported by police departments. The National Crime Victimization Survey is a survey that's sent out to thousands of people, and it's basically reported information as to whether or not they have been victims of a crime. Both of these reports are used to indicate that crime is underreported. However, more than half of the serious crimes, such as robbery, are not reported at all. The National Crime Victimization Survey confirms that the overall rate of crime is higher than the index of reported crime. Most of the public concern in the U.S. focuses on crimes of violence, murder, assault, and rape, even though only 13.4% of all crimes are violence. In the 1990s, the overall U.S. crime rate dropped to its lowest level since 1973, and our crime rate continues to drop to this day, so we don't have high levels of crime. We may think we do because we hear about it or we see it, and we may actually think that personal crimes are high, but that's only because when we hear about murders and it's sensationalized on TV, we bring that up and we hear about it more. We may see where property crime may be higher, but we don't necessarily always hear about burglaries or auto thefts or arson. So one of the things that sociologists or criminologists have done is that they've debunked the myth that our crime continues to rise. Actually, our crime has leveled off pretty much. I'm sorry, not leveled off, it has actually declined. There are two types of crimes: crimes against people and personal crimes. Um, I'm, Let me go back and explain again that there are two types of crimes. You have crimes against people or personal crimes, and you have property crimes. Crimes against people or personal crimes are going to be violent crimes, which include murder, manslaughter, aggravated assault, and unlawful attack by one person upon another for the purposes of inflicting severe or aggravated bodily injury, forcible rape, and robbery. Crimes against property involve the theft of property belonging to others: burglary, larceny, theft, auto theft, and arson. There's also victimless crimes, and we'll talk a little bit more about those, but these are crimes that normally involve illegal drug use, gambling, and prostitution. One thing to realize when we talk about those victimless crimes is that not all crimes stated are crimes in every single state. And once again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Right here, we'll talk about it. So we can see with victimless crimes, we can see that, think about it now, that there are some states which have legalized, right, marijuana use, but in other states it may be seen as illegal. There are some states that allow gambling, and in other states gambling is not allowed. There are some states which allow prostitution, and actually it's Nevada, and no, it's not Las Vegas. There are certain counties, and I think Reno is one of the counties that does allow prostitution, but there are certain counties in Nevada that allow that have legalized prostitution. Hate crimes are assaults or malicious attacks motivated by a social bias. Bias could be based on race, religion, sexual orientation, ethnic, national origin, or disability. This type of crime has actually been increasing in recent years, especially when we see the crimes against gays and lesbians. But one of the things with hate crimes is that typically they tend to be violent crimes, sometimes leading up to death, or it could be crimes where you have maybe written a racial slur, right, on something, or I shouldn't even say racial slur. It could be an ethnic slur on different property or that type of thing. Organized crimes or organized crime syndicates typically involve the provision of legal goods and services to others. These organizations are often based on racial ethnic memberships, organized along the same lines as legitimate businesses, and involve such illegal activities such as prostitution rings, drug dealing, infiltration of legitimate businesses, racketeering, and extortion. Corporate crime is institutionalized deviance that occurs within a context of a formal organization or bureaucracy, and it is actually sanctioned by the norms and operating principles of the bureaucracy and a process known as normalization of deviance. Examples of this would be businesses that cheat on their taxes. Maybe like Enron and World Comstock trading and accounting practices, where they kind of padded the books, or they would do illegal practices, but they were seen as normalized within those organizations, if that makes sense. So it could be something like, when we think about Enron, some of you may know about Enron, some of you may not, but one of the things that Enron is that they used to deal with electricity. And one of the things that Enron did is they basically padded their books for years, and it made it look like their stock was soaring, when in reality they didn't really have anything. And so one of the things that happened is that Enron ended up going out of business, and there were a few guys who actually did get sentenced to prison, which is kind of unusual because a lot of times that typically doesn't happen. Another corporate crime would be when we talk about the Catholic Church priest sexual scandal. How one of the things that happens with that is that it's known, but it's covered up. And when it does come to light, a lot of times the priest may not even get in trouble for that. They may be sent off somewhere where they don't necessarily have to do time. Although we have seen that there are some changes when it comes to that. Socioeconomic status correlates with crime, but prosecution by and treatment within the criminal justice system, from official arrest statistics, treatment by policy patterns of sentencing to imprisonment, is significantly related to patterns of race, gender, class, and inequality. The poor are more likely than others to be arrested, prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced to prisons for crimes. There's a strong correlation that exists between unemployment, poverty, poverty and crime, but law enforcement is concentrated in lower income and minority areas. In addition to the factors that affect official rates of arrest and conviction, biased official statistics, influence of powerful individuals, discrimination in patterns of arrest, and differential policy, there is some evidence that actual commissions of crime varies by race. Minority communities are policed more heavily than white neighborhoods, and policing in minority communities have a different effect than in white middle-class communities. In minority neighborhoods, the police are perceived as a threat, not as protective agents. The police, are perceived as threatening, and most Blacks and Latinos are law-abiding citizens. Okay, police may be using racial profiling, and they're more likely to stop, search, and use force against minority drivers, and racial minorities are more likely than the rest of the population to be victims of excessive force by the police. Those cities where African Americans are the head of the police departments have shown a decline in police brutality complaints and an increase in minority police and minority recruitment, and in some cases a decrease in crime. Increasing the number of African Americans in the police department has some positive effect, but it does not change the material conditions that create the crime or the structural conditions that create the crime. Weston in 2007 and 2014 through Weston's research, showed that African Americans and Latinos experience higher bail, have less success at plea bargaining, and are found guilty more often, and are likely to get longer sentences for the same crime than and are less likely to be released on probation than white Americans. Jacobs in 2007 found that execution rates were higher for minorities who have committed the same crime than whites did.